28 years ago, in southeast Houston, a subdivision and elementary school were demolished after disproportionate numbers of its residents developed serious health problems. The neighborhood, called South Bend, was built next to a defunct refinery and chemical waste recycling complex called Brio refining, whose abandoned stacks and tanks loomed over the neighborhood as kids walked to and from school, splashed in the adjacent creek, and played in a nearby baseball field without noticing that it much, except for maybe the rank odor that those people accepted as part of everyday life. In 1984, just a few years after the first South Bend houses were built, the Brio site became listed by the EPA for suing remediation after tests revealed high levels of toxic chemicals in the soils and groundwater there. Tank bottom sludge and chemical refinery waste had been dumped directly into unlined pits for decades. Companies deemed responsible were appointed to oversee cleanup under the guise of the Brio Site Task Force, which was made up of largely people who ran companies that were responsible for pollution. Through the 1980s and 90s, residents became sicker and neighborhood children were born with birth defects. Parents, Muslim mothers championed by the local community newspaper, fought for compensation and a voice in the cleanup process. Families moved away with or without home buyouts. In 1997, the school and all 677 homes were razed. The task force relocated the rubble to a nearby landfill, and the South Bend acreage was eventually shaped into runoff catching retention ponds that occupy the land today. So the Brio Memory Project considers the circumstances and aftermath of these events, along with gaps in official explanations, stories from those who bore witness, and trauma held by the land itself. The videos are little snapshots into different people's lives who have experienced some kind of psychological or physical, I don't want to say trauma necessarily, but it's definitely left an imprint on people's lives in one way or another. And I'll also say that the next step for this project is to grow it so that it expands to different neighborhoods around the city. I have started investigating, or at least bringing in other people's research and beginning to talk to people about Fifth Ward. And Fifth Ward is, people probably know by now, I don't know, everybody who lives in Houston, I imagine, knows about this, but Fifth Ward is contaminated by, heavily contaminated by creosote from rail yards there. And I found out that that there were chemicals taken from Brio, brought to Fifth Ward and mixed with creosote to create a creosote extension. And so now there are tests that are revealing dioxin from the dust of people's attics, from the soil, and definitely from the groundwater. So that is the context for this, and it's not, it's not all sadness or gloom necessarily. I mean, there are all kinds of memories that can emerge from these situations. But I just wanted to kind of create that landscape as I start introducing people. So, Parrish, let us first start with it.
Yeah, so I've been talking to Heather for a while about this project, and I'm really interested in it, partly just because it's cool, but then also because I'm a lifelong Houstonian, and my family's been in East Texas forever. And so pollution is just kind of an everyday fact of life, right? So I'm going to talk to you about school that I went to. So I grew up in the Woodlands, and we moved there in about 1980. And for those of you who think of the Woodlands as the hell it is right now, it might come as a surprise to you that the town was originally planned as one of the US's first eco-burbs. And so it was still hell, but it was a little bit prettier. So an eco-burb, if you don't know, is basically a suburban neighborhood that has been designed to be more environmentally sustainable than typical suburbs. Eco-burbs usually focus on things like preserving forests, managing stormwater naturally, and clustering development to minimize environmental impact. So the Woodlands opened in 1974. George Mitchell, which is a name that original Woodlanders will say with reverence. Like you always know a long-term Woodlander if they're like, George Mitchell. Right? So George Mitchell picked a 45 square mile site approximately 30 miles from Houston proper, and which had been the site of the Grogan Cochrane sawmill for his eco community. He worked with Ian McCarg, who was a University of Pennsylvania landscape architect and who wrote a seminal book on eco-urban planning called Design with Nature. McCarg advocated for planning with existing nature rather than against it. So for the Woodlands, part of this plan was the creation of villages that would incorporate connected green spaces. So I remember my mom really loved this about the Woodlands. There used to be this large grove of like giant, perfect climbing trees that were on the way to our house. And I remember we would drive by and my mom would talk about how great it was that those trees could never be cut down because they were old growth trees. And I remember thinking, I was probably like 8, I remember just looking at her being like, oh, you sweet summer shadow. Probably around 14 or so, they did clear cut all of that and built a Walmart. So there we go. But the idea here was to create a place for people to decompress from urban life, and the built environment was meant to reflect this. So a quote that I found was describing this project said that building sites were surgically carved out of the woods and screened from view from adjacent boulevards and parkways by stands of mature trees. Commercial signs were strictly limited. A system of dedicated walking trails in lieu of traditional sidewalks was threaded throughout the site to connect individual neighborhoods. Paved surfaces were kept to a minimum, and a few cluster housing sites were nestled into the woods to provide options for economical housing types. So this, of course, also is presuming that the crushing summer heat, the oppressive humidity, legions of mosquitoes, red ants, and other demon creatures would let you leave the house to enjoy that nature, but that's fine. Yeah. So I don't particularly remember it as this eco-paradise, but I will say that most of my time in the Woodlands happened on the outskirts. So I lived near where the aforementioned sawmill was located. We were frequently at a friend's house on Golden Road, which is directly opposite from the original wastewater treatment center, which just smelled wonderful. And nearly every weekend we were at Tamanagh Hall, which is a community center across the highway in one of the U.S.'s few remaining emancipation communities. And this, I found, was only connected to water and sewer systems last year. Last year. So maybe all the paradise is in other places and I just didn't see it. So originally I planned to talk today about water. My childhood itself remembers water as always being slightly dirty. So it was a habit to let water run for a bit before using it for drinking or cooking or bathing to like clear the line. Yes. And even then it was common to see particulates in glasses or a slight brown tinge to the bath water. Obviously the water from the garden hose, which was the only source of water for 80s kids during the day, was metallic, brown, and hot. I also remember frequently boiling water and filling up pitchers for use during the day. I tried to ask my mom about this. She went on a tirade about refineries in East Texas and the corruption of small-town tax assessors, so we didn't get very far. So that was what I had planned to talk about. But then I was on Facebook and I saw one of my friends, somebody I went to school with, talking about their ongoing health issues. And another person asked if it was linked to our middle school. And suddenly I remembered the smell. It's a capital letter, like the smell. So I went to Wilkerson Intermediate School, which was across the street from my house and a mere glance away from the site of the former Grogan Cochrane sawmill. And in the early 1980s, multiple soil and air quality tests were performed at the school due to this continual presence of a strong chemical smell. So the smell permeated clothing and hair, and it was common to immediately change and shower after getting home, just you were trying to get rid of it. Many people reported headaches, nausea, fatigue, skin irritation. So the lab reports, when they came back, indicated phenol in both soil and air samples. And they noted that the phenol in the soil was much higher than that in the air, but they were both concerning levels. So phenol is used in a ton of things. It was one of the first antiseptics. It's a starting material for making aspirin. It's used in the manufacturing of carpets, synthetic rubbers, and preservatives used in wood treatments. And the wood treatment part is important for the story. So phenol is also highly toxic. Even very low levels of phenol can cause significant health issues if there's long-term exposures. Some of these are headaches, memory loss, fatigue, tremors, kidney damage, chronic bronchitis, dermatitis, hypersensitivity, and is thought to potentially cause damage to DNA. So the school was temporarily closed, and underwent remediation, such as sealing the concrete floors, replacing carpets, repainting walls. And then the school reopened in time for the next school year. The smell was still there, but it was better, and not as many people reported symptoms, and it was the 80s, so everyone just kind of got used to it. It was fun. So no cause was ever officially given, but there's strong indicators that it was related to the dump ponds at the former Grogan Cochrane sawmill. So dump ponds were basically just large pits filled with water. They weren't lined or anything. They basically just dug a hole for it. And this was where, when filled with water, and this is where logs were stored to slow down fungal and insect damage and keep the logs from drying out and rotting before they could be processed. So the water in these ponds would often get heavily contaminated with phenol, creosote, oil, tar, and other wood treatment chemicals. When the sawmills closed down, the dump ponds sometimes leaked toxic substances into the surrounding soil and groundwater. So documented cases of illnesses experienced by people living in areas where phenol is detected in soil and air sample reports indicate many of the symptoms that were reported by students, faculty, and staff at Wilkerson. So Wilkerson was essentially just built. There wasn't really any consideration about what it might have been built on. So they didn't really do any tests or anything. They just built. So I went to Wilkerson from 85 to 87, and I don't remember experiencing anything significant other than the smell. But a lot of the people that I went to school with, particularly those that were about 2 years older than me, have just had lifelong problems. So there's a lot of cancer, there's a lot of Graves' disease, lupus, lots of autoimmune diseases that they just can't quite figure out what exactly the problem is. And then a lot of us, and me included, have persistent headaches and chemical sensitivities. When I was talking to my mom, I mentioned that I was lucky that I didn't have any lasting issues, and she was like, "Well, not physical anyway." It's like, thanks, Mom. But this was kind of interesting, right? Because as I was looking into this more, I found that at the time, a lot of parents did report mood changes in their kids. Obviously, this could be connected to puberty, but phenol toxicity does, in fact, cause depression, irritation, anxiety, and it is suspected to disrupt neurotransmitters in the brain. I do know that there were a couple of years where we seemed to have a lot of suicides. And we definitely had our share of violence, including the Woodlands 10, been around for a while, you might know them. These are people I grew up with, I was very good friends with, until they went on to murder Paul Broussard in 1991. So it's really difficult to get accurate information about this toxicity. The Spectrix lab, of course, Spectrix was the name of the lab that they hired back in the 80s to do this. The results are not publicly available. So I can't conclusively say, right? So, for any lawyers around, I am not definitely making this connection, right? But the presence of phenol, so I can't conclusively say that this presence caused any of these illnesses. There is a Facebook group for people who believe their illnesses are connected to their time at Wilkerson, and it seems that there are some investigations that are ongoing. On the Facebook group, there's something like 200 plus people that were there over about like a 5-year period that talk about this. So, all in with this, I think the larger issue is what this might mean for people living in the surrounding areas, right? So I grew up 0.3 miles from the school, right? At the time, it was really convenient because I could get up like 10 minutes before, book it, and barely be late. So my house and my neighborhood predate the school. They were built before the school. And if the soil and air samples of Wilkerson show concerning levels of phenol, what would the samples from across the street show? And I don't think that this is going to be investigated because I think that what this would mean for the Woodlands would be absolutely terrible, right? It began in that area, and the lawsuits and just all kinds of things would really definitely hurt housing prices. It's America's hometown after all, and they don't want to do the negativity. So anyway, so thank you for letting me share that. the Brio project. I was going to San Jack. My mom just mentioned it offhand. I was like, what? Because I would stare out at these fields in between classes. I would sit in my car. I had no idea. I had been going to school in South Houston for years. Went to a very religious school over there. So hearing about it was this moment where I it meant for me, or it means for me now. It's like this moment I realized, wow, I've been learning and learning and learning, but but there's so much that's part of this land and this air that no one taught me about. So Heather invited me to go do this performance, and this video up here is from it. And the performance is basically me washing my feet and connecting with some of my own toxicity and trauma that's all related to that area in my mind. So I'm going to read the text that I wrote to kind of like go along with these actions that I was able to do, which were really cathartic and meaningful for me at the site. I'm washing my own feet on toxic ground. 4 bottles of guilt and sin-tinged waters, all of them being poured out over a mass grave for my homie. First bottle. I'm washing my feet with my favorite sweet treat, Dr. Pepper, a Texas favorite, the one addiction that I would die for, if I was going to die for an addiction. My friend Daniel brought one to me at our high school graduation, and it made him I felt guilty for years. Daniel is in prison now for killing his wife. Mary washed Jesus' feet, the sinful woman. There were so many Marys around Jesus, they just kind of blended all into one ambiguous Mary. Mother, poor, sinful, virgin, Mary, the humble servant. Jesus washed his disciples' feet, the forgiver. Second bottle. I'm washing my feet with a jar of water taken from my dirty fish tank. Gary and Josephina is what we named the fish, and they kept multiplying. The fish are multiplying. We named one Bread too, but that one died a while ago. Google said they would stop having so many babies once the tank had plenty of babies, but they keep having babies. And I don't know how to keep up with them. Their tank gets dirty fast, and I feel really sorry. Forgetting myself is easier to do when I'm here, looking at a sunset. Beautiful. Life abundant. Flocks of birds bathing in the toxicity. When I'm home alone, it's easier to believe that I am a lone sinner. When I tell Daniel's story, I feel guilty. I ask myself, why did I pick a murderer for a friend? Why do I keep loving the violent ones? That's what other people ask me when I mention that my good friend from high school murdered a beautiful school teacher. Why do you do that, Julia? When I'm here washing my feet in a maternity dress, the age of the babies that were hurt by this place, I think of the women that had to scream to be heard to end the child sacrifice. No one washed women's feet in the Bible. Here, trying my best doesn't seem that bad. Third bottle, I wash my feet with bottled water, full of microplastics, they say, overindulgent plastic that feels so clean. It's such a relief, an imperfect, less harmless relief. My daughter and I drink a lot of plastic water bottles. Some say that Mary was one of Jesus' favorite disciples, but when she was written out of the story, we don't get to read about Jesus getting down on his knees and washing a woman's feet. Mary was not blessed with main character energy. Mary washed feet with tears. My mom sent me to school out here, drove 45 minutes every morning to get a strong foundation on Blue's graveled.
Yes.
Last fall, I washed my feet with Diet Coke.
You sleep up again?
I didn't expect to leave this bottle as the final foot cleanser, but I realize now that even though I meant to say her name, I have forgotten it. This was her favorite drink. Daniel's wife. Daniel texted me from her grave. That's the last time I heard of Daniel. He brought it to her very favorite, Diet Coke. Daniel is in prison now, sentenced for 85 years for killing crap. I asked around for his address. Someone saw his true crime episode and sent it to me, but I have not sent him a letter yet. The ground sizzles. Diet Coke ate my mother's bones. That's an addiction that won't make you fat. It's bad, like the beloved Dr. Pepper. Osteoporosis or diabetes. I want her Diet Coke to linger on me for a while, mixed with the earth. I couldn't wash it off because despite all my best intentions, the name of her murderer has echoed in my head for years, but her name right now is missing. Finally, I put on protective gloves and fill up my empty bottles and baptize him. I was able to pour the toxic water all over the drawing that Heather made for our collaboration in this. It was a drawing of his news story. So far from my own story of Daniel. This decaying image is filled with seeds. The sun sets, light on the water, a full moon behind me. Toxic cleanse.
Yes, yes.
So if you've never been there, there's this block from, I think it's Scarsdale down to Dixie Farm Road. What's that road? That's 2351? Yeah, 2351. Right, so it's a really strange strip of road on Beamer because there's all houses, right? From here all the way to like Scarsdale. And then starting with Scarsdale all the way down Beamer to 2351, there's no houses, which always struck me as strange because you got Clear Lake and Friendswood and and then Sagemont and this huge city blocks. I really don't know how to address this whole thing because what I experienced was an apocalypse, so I would give you 3 apocalyptic images from my experience. The one is the ghost town, the second is the soil furnace, and the third is the white tarp. And so I'm going to just relate those images to you, and then maybe I can talk a little bit about the social relations of it, and then conclude with really the frustrations of global warming and for the longest time, it feels like we're in a world where you're seeing a child rush onto an interstate, a busy interstate. You just know it's got to stop, right? That something has to change. And when you do that, I'm sure we all experience it year after year after year, the urgency. So I guess I'll conclude with some thoughts about that. So like when I grew up, I was very familiar with pollution. There were 4 factories and shoe factories in my small town. It's just hard to believe I'm even saying that, right? A shoe factory in America in the 60s. But we had a river behind our house, about a mile, called Rivers River, and there were no fish when I was a kid. So when I went fishing, I was not like my dad who was able to catch fish. Like I could never catch fish because there were no fish in the 60s, so I've been aware of this kind of thing for a long time. And so teaching across the street, there was always this, we should do something about this, and there should be more in the air about it. And the students didn't know about it, but you know, I think like what you were saying, very aptly, it's like, what can you do? You know, they would talk about their friends who had cancer and that kind of thing. My students would, and get on with class and with their lives. It's not like anybody was organizing anything, except the board president, one of the board members, Marie Flickinger, was very much a champion out there, and she did a very good job with what she was doing through the local newspaper. But the school was oppressive when it came to organizing. In fact, I tried to organize a faculty organization, and I was told by the president of the school, "You'll not start a union here." And just say that because that's sort of the environment, you know, that I was working in at the time, as kind of the shame and the bad feelings I have for not doing more, you know, for not standing up and just doing whatever my self-explode, like this frustration is my point. Anyway, Ghost Town. So first there was an abandoned subdivision that Heather mentioned. There's just an intersection, and you can take a left and go into the school parking lot, and then the right is where this West South Bend subdivision was, and you know, it was all blocked off, but for a while it wasn't, so I would go there. So this is my apocalyptic experience. This is the working class, blue collar child, you know, like trying to make something of this. So I thought, okay, I'll go eat lunch over there. So I would drive in there, and you know, it's just abandoned. The houses, you know, the garage doors are crooked, and you know, the holes in the roof and all of this, you know, but you could pull in still. Even though there's grass kind of growing between the cracks in the roads and stuff, and you could take a cul-de-sac and turn around and park near a curb and just have lunch and sort of take in this whole thing that's beyond, like it's the most expensive movie set ticket you could ever have to hang out on because it was real, you know, it's like, damn, all this, someone should take this in somehow, how I felt about it. So I occasionally we'd go over there and have lunch, just to take it in and see what I could think. And also, like, this was the 80s, you know, this was the 90s, but in the 80s, abandoned neighborhoods were not unusual. Like, this was a bust at the time. And Ellington Field also had this area where I'd go over there and everything was poured out for subdivisions, but there were no houses, and I'd go over there and just, you know, have some lunch, take a break. So that was kind of the ghost town lunches I had. And then the soil furnace, is this massive industrial burn incinerator, as if someone took a petrochemical plant with all of its pipes and its scaffoldings and its burn stacks and just moved it off 225 right next door to our school. And it was, originally they were going to burn the soil. That's pretty crazy, right? The site remediation was originally going to be done through an on-site incinerator, burn poisonous soil with the prevailing winds going towards Clear Lake and Friendswood. That's an interesting move. And I thought, how could that be a good idea? Right next door to a hospital and a school. So that got shut down. And then we've got the white tarp. I just remember this, remember these are huge fields, right? As far as your eye could see, right? 62 acres. And they stretched this white tarp. So I think they put some dirt down, finally they remedied it, and then they put a white tarp. So this description of going to worse, it's a white tarp stretching out pristine and glistening on a cleared land as far as your eye could see. Snowfall in Houston, could be July. And then it was placed over land that had been elevated by dirt, and then they threw some more dirt on top of it. I'm sure Heather can tell us if that's how they remedied it with these retention ponds.
Yeah, they basically contained all of the chemicals. They didn't move anything. Everything was contained inside these layers that Michael is describing with a plastic, not plastic, but a membrane that's supposed to contain the chemicals, and then layers of clay, and then another layer, and then of membrane, and then soil on top of that. And then they also built a 50-foot steel retention wall on just on the creek side, not all the way around the thing, but just on the creek.
And they also started building houses in the same area. I mean,
Yeah, there's a
the
subdivision.
bayou takes a big turn right there, and to me, that's where the lot is demarked by, where the bayou turns, but on the other side of the bayou, kind of halfway down from Scarsdale on B, where they got houses there. Can you imagine? Right? So, did I spend my time? I mean,
I don't know, you got. What do y'all think? How y'all feeling?
keep going. Well, just the politics would be frustrated and disappointed, and like whenever I raised, I don't want to sound like a martyr, like I really was busy getting my PhD and living my married life and stuff, right? So, but I'm pretty much of an organizer, I think. And when I hear things like this, and I apologize, to you as students, right? Like, this was a world event, it's a super fun site right next door, and I was teaching English, that involves, communication and humanity and all of that. Anyway, so I was kind of disappointed in that, not that I didn't stop trying. Got a little more political in the 2000s where, I rebuilt a house with all repurposed material, and I would take my bike to work and stuff. And, remember when gas went to $4.50 a gallon? I think that was like in 2008. The students really, they were like, I can't afford to go to work. They were waitresses and stuff. They were at that moment in the economy, not for a long couple of months, but I tried to organize bus routes for the students. I just would bring these ideas up, and I didn't fight that hard, but like, there's just no energy for it, right? It's just like our society, just no stick to it. And so that's kind of how I wanted to end, was like, I think we all have to keep learning how to learn, and that's as hopeful as I can be, because when it comes to the environment, like, this is a bummer. I wish I could tell you that I came in with a lot of optimism and hope, but I think we have to own our own stuff, and we're in bad shape, and we can't be pessimistic. So I don't know what to do.
We'll keep having conversations like this.
Conversations at least.
Yeah, at least. We have to start somewhere. Thanks, Michael.
So I think my presentation is going to be a little bit different from others that I've heard, largely because I'm 29, and a cancer cluster determination was made in the neighborhood that I grew up in 2019. Geez, that was 6 years ago, so I was 23. And my mother passed away when I was 18 of lung cancer, and my father passed away when I was 21 of prostate cancer that they had for a long time. My mom's was short-lived, and my dad's has been over a long period of time. And immediately after the designation, everything came together and lost head on a lot of people's heads in my neighborhood. And there's been a lot of organizing there since then, since 2019, and I've been a part of the organizing. And so I think the first time I talked about it, about what happened to me and what happened to my family, was in 2019 or early 2020, when I was 24. So I've been like telling my story a lot of time, many times for many years. And as I've gotten older, I've started to want to just relate to it differently, because there is in that consciousness and in that state of mind where I'm constantly talking about trauma, death, and wrongs that were done, and environmental harms that are very purposeful in terms of where products are dumped, where remediation is prioritized or not prioritized. A big difference too between my neighborhood and the Brio Superfund site is that, well, Brio is a Superfund site. My neighborhood is not. It's just an active cancer cluster that people are just living in. And that fills me with so much rage, especially since there are many people who basically are living in houses that people died in and their families have to sell, and flippers are buying them and renting them back to people, and Texas real estate law says you don't have to disclose any kind of environmental contamination, so they're renting them back to people, and it's the same income profile. People are just not able to afford homes at this point. So I took a different approach with what I wrote, just because I wanted to talk about something in a different way. I'm looking at one of my father's photographs. It's my mother wearing a red blouse and matching large bow on hair tied low. She's smiling. There's only a sliver of evidence, only the beginning of the expression, before her face is obscured by the roots of the grapevine. That grapevine vexed my father year after year by never bearing fruit. I'm not sure if this was a year they tried to conceive. 11 years they had tried before having me, with several miscarriages along the way, that I only know of conversations with my mother so brief and shadowed that I sometimes wonder if I imagined them. But in the moment of the photograph, blurred somewhat with the trace of her full body laughter, green leaves before her and a sea of green behind, my mother is all joy. In 1990, my father began taking photography classes at HCC and discovered a whole new language for communicating his viewpoint to the world and documenting his experiences. A working-class Black man who grew up in the Louisiana countryside and worked various blue-collar jobs, my father was not the kind of person whose perspective is considered important. He had been aware of this since adolescence and had always looked against it. He loved poetry, and in high school had a Black feminist poem published in Houston's Bowler Times newspaper. But for him, writing poetry didn't stick the way photography did. I believe it was because he had the most to say about things that don't talk. My father's final portfolio for the class is filled with meditations on the environment, and particularly our neighborhood, in the form of close-up studies of fallen tree limbs and weathered fence posts, dense patches of overgrown forests, and the husks of buildings halfway between structure and decay. There are no street scenes, no captures of urban life. The only people present in the photographs are children in a playground in an elementary school near our home, and my mother. There are a few scattered pictures of sculptures and skyscrapers, beautifully executed but severe. It is where the wild things are that the interest lies. The gnarled tree limb seems to move. The kudzu-covered forest seems to breathe. The photograph of my mother at the grapevine is, I've come to realize, the heart of it all, right in our backyard. She is the earth laughing in flower, the center of my father's natural world. Here, the photos say, is where life is. Decades later, long after I was born, after my mother died and my father, after the grapevine was ripped from the ground by the workers who bought the house, they told us that an invisible plume of toxic chemicals had been killing people in my neighborhood and causing infertility. Despite all of this, and knowing that the chemicals are invisible, I still find myself incapable of seeing death in this or any other of my father's photographs. Perhaps I'm biased because I was most alive when I lived there. Perhaps I'm biased because being Black means being dead while we were still alive. But in a culture where the animate and inanimate, living and dead, conscious and unconscious, are so rigidly separated, categorized, and ranked, these photographs represent the truth of the matter, which is that all of these exist together, all at once.
So, hi, my name's Spencer. I'm an alcoholic. Wrong meeting here. So, I cuss a lot, dude. I just talk a lot of shit. First and foremost, dude, like, whatever the fuck you guys are seeing, that's your own interpretation, dude. I ain't shit. We ain't shit. We just happen to be in an era that we had provided for ourselves because we were living in what was deemed a master plan community, Pearland, Texas. Get out of here with that shit. We didn't end up, some of our friends grew up in South Bend, so we have a couple cats facing some medical issues. Unfortunately, when they got bought out on that, they ended up going, their parents, when they signed off to get relocated on that, they also signed off their children's rights to sue for any further implications that came about. So we have people that died from lymphoma, we've had people that have passed from cancer. Oops. Now, whether this was direct thing, that's to be, you know, delve into deeper, whatever the fuck, dude, but to sign away somebody else's ability to stand up for themselves while facing, I mean, America's this, man. We in this for us, and we're in it for our people. Like, America doesn't care about you. America doesn't care about me. It's profits over people 100% of the time, no matter what. That's why the term remediation project, it's such just a fuck, it's a hand job, man. It's basically saying we're gonna take care of this to try to fix this, but you ain't doing anything about it. As long as the profits are showing, dude, we don't care. Which is what you were speaking about earlier, about Fifth Ward ain't even getting any recognition because they're not even deemed technically a Superfund site. They're just, oh, we're gonna put that under the wayside because profits over people every time. So I have no clue what the hell my boy Booth wrote, and I'm not a good speaker. If tension, or whatever the hell, anxiety, violence, all that is a side effect from Brio, well, that's a side effect from Brio, so you can't play that shit on me no more long. You heard me. You're the problem, not me. All right, so I'm gonna read some stuff. Booth don't like going by Booth, so we're gonna call him Al Stewart. So, here we go. I don't remember much. Faces, names, people, my wife's phone number. I'm an unreliable narrator. I lie on purpose occasionally, but mostly I have no idea what happened. He says, my first memory is my father looking at a fence that had blown down in our backyard during a hurricane. I think the year's '84. I can search it, but I'm writing based on memory, and I don't think a hurricane came that year. I think it was actually '83 and probably Alicia at the time. So maybe our fence just fell down. '84, his parents divorced. He had a nice house on a bend that gave us a larger yard than the standard Wood Creek neighborhood. We weren't exactly latchkey kids, but many kids in the neighborhood lived in a single parent home. This led to much time to roam the neighborhood and the many creeks and drainage systems around. Dixie Farm Road runs just south of Wood Creek, that's a fact, connecting to our west border with FM 518. I'm the 518, so are some of these cats here. It's just 518 and Brio, we all the same, and it was just the era of the time that we lived in because we had to make something for ourselves because we're not part of the plan, the master plan community. We just made this shit. When I was young, 1985 or so, I recall always staring at the large storage tanks that lined Dixie Farm Road as I approached Beamer. They stood 20 feet to 40 foot tall, their purpose unknown. And the cultural celebrating Captain Planet, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and toxic waste dump on local news every day crept into our conscious. I don't recall any specific discussion with adults or kids about it. I was just aware there's some super funny shit going down right now over yonder. He really put over yonder, so. All right. In the culture celebrating, we already went through that shit. I always felt weird growing up. I used to think as myself as an artist. We formed a noise band around 15, trying to sound like Throbbing Gristle and Ministry. We fell short. Anytime you stand on stage in a dress and scream bloody murder while banging on some pans, a few people will decide if they want to give you positive attention. So we were a noise band. We at some point, our original band was called W-Gas, which stands for Who Gives a Shit. And everybody else that came on was the Brio kids. Everybody. If you had a Casio keyboard and you could hit the demo button, then that was the Brio kids, dude, because we were all about everybody. There are signs indicating buried gas lines, warning gas you can steal and cut in, and it said W-Gas. We laid around the house with delay and reverb pedals stoned out of our minds, banging on pots and pans and screaming for hours. A few days a week, played a few talent competitions because it was open to anyone, even those like us with no talent. Local church talent show had, and I swear we had pots for drums and a guitar and just screamed a bunch. After a nice gentleman elder at the church gave us some solid advice, said, might consider having the drummer play a beat, then have the guitar go along with the drum, then have the bass go along with that. You know, you might actually have a song. That's the best advice we ever got. We're going places now at this point now. I mean, it's from here to Billboard top 20. We upset David Bowie back in '87. You can Google that shit right now if you want. We often invite every one of our friends to play with us. That's what was with the Brio kids there. And we jokingly call those people Brio kids, sort of mocking them for not having talent when we had none ourselves when we played a live show in Santa Fe where everyone was on mushrooms in 1996. But long story short, we were known as W-Gas and the Brio kids. Like you kind of touched on, man, we grew up in Wood Creek, right down the road. We swam in that shit. Frankie Carter, Randolph Park, if you snuck through there until they blew it up in high times, had the best shrooms that you could get on the planet. I mean, legitimately top-notch shrooms. And then that shit got blown up in high times and blew up our spot. We weren't very happy with that shit, because the hell else are you gonna do in a master plan community when you ain't got a car? You can only fit 9 people in a Cadillac, man. You can't fit 12. She knows because she used to ride Trump until she earned rank, dude. Pushing somebody else back to Trump, dude. So, but what it was is we sit in a spot, the current curriculum at the school, this master plan community is just feeding us nonsense and bullshit. Just recite this shit and you'll pass, you'll get a good thing. You're between the lines on this shit, man. I mean, right here between those lines, what's the real one? They don't give a fuck about any of us. So we gotta bond together in everything that you do, man. Love your loved ones and hate your enemies, man. Fight for injustice, watch out for the little people, dude. Teach the fucking youth. A lot of us here in this room right now, we're at a point where, hey, I'm coming up on 45, some of y'all say that's baby, whatever the fuck, dude, cool. Like, we we at a point now where it's time to teach the youth to read between the curriculum that's being shoved down our throats. All this stuff, oh, it's safe now. They're building over there on South Bend at this point. They got new housing up there, but that's because EPA regulations got banished. At some point, they voted out. They voted out the highest person that was watching over that shit, and the next person up on that was an ex-Monsanto secretary. So if you go back through some of the logs when they had the community meetings down there for South Bend, and almost every single one of them that you can find, that we were able to find online, had a Monsanto representative. So while it gets pointed, a lot of fingers get pointed at, Dixie Oil? Was it Dixie Oil?
Processor.
Yeah. So a lot of fingers get pointed there, but you gotta realize, like, behind the scenes is the puppeteer. I don't usually get up in front of cats. I hate this shit. It's fucking weird, dude. I like being behind the curtain like Wizard of Oz, but that's what these cats are doing, dude. Behind a lot of the stuff that happened down there, dude, at the Brio Superfund, a lot of it's being misguided by Monsanto, which apparently they produce 2/3 of the world's soybean, 1/3 of the world's soybean, and now they get hit on that shit. Like, fuck them. But I don't know if y'all got questions. I cuss a lot, I drink a lot. Fucking let's have a good fucking time. Fuck them. We stand up for each other, dude.